So to ask questions in Spanish, we use interrogative words. Fancy term, interrogative words. They sound like the words interview or the word interrogate. So again, we use these to ask questions to get more details. So again, we're using interrogative words to help us gather more information. This is going to give us more knowledge instead of just yes or no questions. We want to avoid those. So what are these words? Here's our list. We have adonde, which means to where. We're talking about a destination. Como, or how. This we're talking about conditions, characteristics potentially. Cuál, or cuáles. Remember, this could be plural. Which, we're selecting from a group. Cuándo, for when. Specific or general time is what we're doing. Cuánto, cuántos. How much, or how many. Remember, because of these endings, they have to match their noun. And cuánto will be used before a verb. Remember to watch those endings. De donde, from where. We're talking about origin. Plano donde, where. We're talking about location. Por qué, two separate words. Why? Remember that por qué, all one word, is because. Que means what? You're giving definitions or identifying something. Quién, or plural quiénes, means who, talking about people. Specifically, a quién could be to whom, or de quién could be whose. Remember that all interrogative words have accent marks, so when they're used in a question, you must memorize their locations. Without the accent, the whole meaning of the word changes. An example would be como, without an accent, means like or as, but como with an accent means how. Now for punctuation when we use interrogatives, remember that we put an upside down question mark at the start of the question and a normal question mark at the end of the question. This is helpful when we read especially because the question mark at the beginning tells us the tone right away that we should have in mind. Because remember that in questions, tone and pitch change so that we know that it is a question when we hear it out loud. If you like to think about formulas, a common way to think about questions is you'd have your interrogative word first, and then whatever details follow. Could be a verb, could be a noun, depending on the interrogative you choose. Then add your extra details. Let's talk about frequency words, or these expressions and phrases that tell us how often you do an activity. Remember, by using these, it's helpful because you get more detail out of the conversation than just yes or no or simple answers. Here are words. We've got a menudo, which means often, a veces, sometimes. Después de means after, antes de means before. El fin de semana means on the weekend. Notice that it is el at the beginning. Then we've got on the weekends, los fines de semana. We do not use en to say on. We use el or los. Then we got nunca, never. Siempre, always. Todos los días, every day. Or el martes would be like saying on Tuesday. Remember, we use the article here, so el, in order to say on. Remember with questions that we don't always have to use interrogatives. Once again, we do not always need to use interrogatives or question words in order to ask a question. We could instead use verbs. Specifically, conjugated verbs. Remember when you say yo hablo in Spanish, that can translate to 3 different things. So we have 3 ways that can be translated. We can have I talk, I do talk, or I am talking. So therefore, just by using a verb and a conjugation of that verb, we can express do or does in a Spanish question. So do you talk? So once again, we can express do or does for any action just by conjugating and making it a question with punctuation. It's implied. So remember, there is no actual word, do or does. It is just implied by the translation. All right, so a formula you could think about is verb, conjugated, then the subject, then any extra details when you want to write questions this way. Remember your punctuation at the start and end of your question. For instance, you might have, ¿hablas español? Do you speak Spanish? Remember that in questions that use verbs in Spanish, the subject typically in a question goes after the verb, as in directly after, or it can go at the very end of the question. Once again, so the subject is going to either go after the verb or way at the end. So, ¿hablas tú el español? Would be, do you speak Spanish? Or, ¿hablas español tú? Both of those are technically correct. Remember, you can leave out the tú if you want because our conjugation already tells us that you're talking to you. When you're thinking about answering questions, remember that if a question used an interrogative, you're going to need to give a more detailed answer. So for instance, ¿qué haces después de la escuela? What do you do after school? I'm going to need a full sentence. Something like, yo estudio español. But if I write a question that just uses a verb, it's a possibility that you could ask a yes or no question or respond with a yes or no, and then add any further details. So for instance, ¿hablas español con tus amigos? Would be your question. Do you speak Spanish with your friends? And you'd say something like, sí, hablo español con ellos. Yes, I speak Spanish with them. Or no hablo español con ellos. Remember, when answering negatively in Spanish, you must use two no's at the start of your reply. The first no is answering the question. You're just simply saying no. The second one is saying I don't. So essentially saying no, I don't. Muy bien. Gracias.